Everyone. So once again, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Good morning, Excellencies. Good morning, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is with a great pleasure that I welcome you all here today. And to begin, a warmly thanking for our generous hosts, the German Embassy. For supporting and hosting this important event. We are gathered here to launch the second edition of the report commissioned by UNHCR to Deloitte that focused on the contribution of refugees to the Polish economy. Once again, the findings confirm what we continue to see in practice. When refugees are supported from day one, when we invest in people and create conditions for inclusion, everyone benefits. I will not go into the details. We have colleagues from Deloitte with us today to present the methodology, the results, the numbers, but the message is already clear. This is not only the right thing to do from a humanitarian and social standpoint, but it's also economically sound. It's good for business and it's good for Poland. So I hope you find today's presentation insightful and that it helps all of us to reflect on the value of inclusive approaches to refugee integration. And with that, it is my honor to hand the floor to His Excellency, Witold Ebling, Ambassador of Germany in Poland. Mr. Ambassador.
Can I close this, or does everything, do the lights go out if I close this?
You can close it.
I can close it. Okay, I can put this on the... Well, dzień dobry, dear friends, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, dear Kevin, dear Mr. Leszek, dear Fabrice, and friends from the diplomatic community, and so if you around the room here, great to have you here. It's really a great pleasure. It's an important issue we are going to talk about today, so I'm very happy about the presentation. We will see an important study prepared by Deloitte for UNHCR, the analysis on the impact of refugees from Ukraine on the economy of Poland. Let me first of all really say my sincere thanks to Kevin Allen, here the refugee coordinator for Ukraine situation in Poland at UNHCR. Very close cooperation we have, and friendly and professional, I have to say, cooperation also in the past years. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate. And also, of course, warmly thank Alexander Leszek, Senior Manager at Deloitte, who will shortly present the findings of the report. This study, I really believe that it comes at a significant time. It has been 3 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainians continue to endure unimaginable hardships. From the outset, the West, let's say NATO, EU, Poland, Germany, and many others have stood in strong and united solidarity with Ukraine, militarily, politically, and in humanitarian support. And in these days, we are seeing, of course, terrible attacks happening in the cities of Ukraine, and this is unfortunately going on. Poland's response has been exceptional, opening their homes, schools, workplaces, and let me say, their hearts to millions of displaced Ukrainians has not only been a gesture of compassion, it was, of course, but it was also a statement of European solidarity in action. Germany, my country, has welcomed over 1 million refugees from Ukraine, and we have worked closely with our Polish friends in supporting those seeking peace, safety, dignity across our borders. This joint effort, grounded in the values we share as Europeans, continues to be a powerful example of what unity and cooperation can achieve. Today's report confirms what many of us have seen on the ground and what we must translate into policy. Although the integration of refugees in the labor market can be challenging, refugees are also important contributors and an important asset for our economies and societies. In Poland, refugees from Ukraine have integrated into the labor market with remarkable speed. Employment rates among refugees have risen steadily. The economic contribution now accounts for an impressive 2.7% of Poland's GDP. This is not only a reflection of their own determination and resilience, it is also a reflection of wise policies that allowed for quick access to work, education, and public services. I have the feeling that in Germany we can learn a little bit from this. We also learn from this study that in regions with higher refugee employment, Polish citizens experienced higher employment rates themselves and lower unemployment. This evidence, also observed in Germany, by the way, dispels old myths and shows clearly migration, when managed responsibly and inclusively, can boost productivity and raises prosperity for all. Important message. Of course, challenges remain. Language barriers, recognition of qualifications, schooling, labor market mismatches must be addressed. But the direction seems very clear to me. When we invest in people, we unlock their full potential for their families, for our societies. A few days ago, in this room, we had an interesting, I think, important meeting organized together with UNICEF on the issue of schooling and training for young people, for children, for adolescents also. And I think these are important messages, and I'm really happy about what United Nations institutions are doing in this country, in this sense, in the whole, broad issue of how to help people by helping ourselves in the end. Germany is committed to continuing our close cooperation and partnership with Poland, with UNHCR, and our EU partners to support Ukraine and those forced to flee. The people of Ukraine, dear friends, have reminded us of the value of freedom. The people of Poland have reminded us of the power of solidarity and of compassion also. And the refugees themselves have shown us that with opportunity comes contribution. I look forward to the discussion today, to hearing more from Alexander Laszek about the findings of this important study. So thank you very much. But first of all, the floor goes to you, dear Kevin. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thanks very much, Victor, and thanks to the German Embassy for hosting this event. Of course, thanks to our friends at Deloitte. And I really just want to say on a personal note, Victor, what a pleasure it is to work with you and with diplomats that you have on your team. Germany really has played a leading role in the context of inclusion, economic inclusion. This isn't the first event. You mentioned the event with UNICEF. We've also had roundtables in the past with the private sector. It's good to see some of our colleagues here from the private sector, from academia, from the diplomatic corps. Oftentimes, when we gather to discuss this type of issue, the contribution of foreigners to an economy and the analysis from an economic perspective, we're talking about regulated migration. We're talking about people who've applied for a visa at a consulate, who have a particular job profile that is matched with the needs of a country, and then they move to that country and they work or start a business there. But in this situation, unfortunately, we're talking about 10 million people who were forced out of their homes at gunpoint or under the rain of bombs because of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This was not a choice. This was something that was dictated, that they were forced to do. And as you all know, in the early days of the crisis in Poland, you had up to 4.5 million people pouring across the border in 2022. These were not people who'd applied for a visa and who'd thought about working in Poland. They simply had no choice. And they showed up with little more than the backpack or the suitcase that they and their daughter were carrying, or their son. And at that point, the European Union and Poland had a decision to make. And happily, they made a very smart decision on different grounds. On the humanitarian ground, by allowing people to come in to seek safety, to find asylum, to get temporary protection status. But they also made very smart policy decisions when it comes to the economics of this situation. If you look at this situation maybe from a distance, as Victor alluded to, the geopolitical context is very far from clear. Peace remains elusive. It's not clear when or if refugees can return home in a sustainable fashion. And in many ways, this is a day and a situation that is not very happy. We are facing a situation now over 3 years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine that does not give us an immediate cause for hope. But we didn't gather here today to talk about that aspect of the story, but rather a story of the strength of the human spirit and resilience. And this is a story of the Ukrainian people, and I'm very glad to see we have a colleague here from the Ukrainian embassy. This is a story, really, about a very brave fight against aggression, and you witness it in the news every day when you see brave Ukrainian fighters fighting aggression and the invasion of their country, the disregard of the UN Charter, and the disregard of international humanitarian law. This is a fight against aggression. But from the very moment that that first mother with her children crossed the border in 2022 seeking asylum, this has also been a fight for family. And we should not forget that in those early days, in the first year, 90% of the refugees who fled across that border were women with their children. Now, there were women fighting also, including on the front lines, but many of the men, most of the men, were back home fighting. So while the men were fighting and some of the women in Ukraine, there was another fight that was occurring here in Poland, and it was a fight for family and a fight for survival. But the other thing, and this is something that you alluded to, Victor, is our friends from Ukraine have also been fighting for freedom. They've been fighting for the rules-based international order that emerged right here in Poland after World War II, that gave birth to my organization, the UN Refugee Agency, to the 1951 Refugee Convention. And so this is a good news story in that regard, but it's also a good news story because the European Union, Germany, Poland had the foresight to make a very smart decision. On the one hand, honor their commitments under international law, allow people to seek asylum to find safety, but on the other hand, to implement smart economic policies. Now, it may seem like a foregone conclusion that when you have a large-scale influx of refugees, the receiving country will automatically allow them to work or to start a business. Well, I can tell you that's often not the case. And in one of my more recent assignments, managing the exodus of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar into Bangladesh, now, 8 years on, they still are not allowed to work. They're not even allowed to leave the refugee camp where they reside. They're certainly not allowed to start small businesses. So by making that decision from day one, Poland immediately gave refugees dignity and the ability to work and to fend for themselves, to not be reliant on humanitarian aid. But another part of this story, and I think Alexander will get into this perhaps in a bit more detail, is it's not just simply about allowing the market to work its magic by giving people the right to work and to start businesses. It also included healthcare, education, social benefits, and that enabled especially mothers with their children the ability to engage in the economy. Now, we can talk about things like childcare, and if we could do more on that front, and there's a number of challenges and obstacles that we could address to do even better. But that package, that comprehensive approach to inclusion made a big difference. And you're going to hear about it more from Alexander, but not only did it drive the GDP up by 2.7%, but if you break that down, it increased productivity across the board. It drove wages up for Poles. Stop and think about that. The fear is always when you have a large inflow, unexpected, of foreigners, you're going to drive wages down. The opposite occurred. And we'll hear more about why that is. But part of the reason is it allowed Poles to seek higher paying jobs, specialize more. So this was a win-win scenario for Poland and for the Ukrainian refugees. At the same time, and you'll hear more about this from Alexander, Poles were paying taxes. They were contributing to Social Security. I'm not a politician, but I can tell you if I was, I would run on this platform. This is a great story. Poland did the right thing. They stood up for European values. They allowed refugees to come in, gave them asylum, but they also made smart policy choices that benefited Poland and benefited Ukraine. And ultimately, what this is about is investment in human capital for the future. Now, that future for some Ukrainians may be here in Poland. Hopefully, it's back in Ukraine where they can return home and help rebuild the country. But it's also about investing in human capital for Europe. This is a story that in 5-10 years we will see play out, where you have increased cross-border trade, foreign direct investment, commerce, exchange culturally, a win-win situation for Europe, for Poland, for Germany, and for Ukraine. So on that note, I'm going to hand the floor over now to Alexander. I think we've got the PowerPoint up and running. And thank you once again, Victor and the German Embassy for hosting us, and thanks to our friends from Deloitte for doing this second study on the economic impact of Ukrainians in Poland.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We had a pleasure for the second time to work for UNHCR, looking this time not to update our previous study, but also at the challenges that still remain. As it was already mentioned, the contribution to Polish economy, the impact of refugees is really huge. So I will first talk about this impact and then dig deeper into remaining challenges and opportunities that we still have there. So starting with the impact. Compared to our previous study, we see that more refugees are working and their wages are going up. So their employers benefit from their work. There is still about 15 to 20% gap compared to Poles, but this gap is getting smaller. So we see on the one hand that more people is on the labor market, and on the other hand, those that are already on the market are aiming higher. They work on higher, on better jobs and earn more, contributing more to the economy as well. So this is the first part, refugees on labor market. But the second part that we look into particularly in this study is how Polish economy adapted. As it was already mentioned, there's always a fear that when around 500,000 of people pops up on the labor market, that it will drive unemployment, that it will force some Poles out of the labor market. Please pay attention particularly to women, because refugees were mainly women, so you could expect more competition on jobs that are usually held by women. As you can see, on the national level, employment rate of Polish women was steadily growing and unemployment was falling. So we don't see any negative impact on this macro level. Of course, someone might argue that refugees are in particular cities, so the impact is more concentrated. We looked also at this. We ran several econometric models looking how employment rate, unemployment rate, and earnings of Poles are affected by larger share of refugees in a given powiat. And the results that we see is that the more refugees are in a given powiat, the employment rate of Poles is going higher, unemployment is falling, and the wages are going up. Furthermore, one can argue that maybe this is not because of refugees, but because of some underlying trends. That there were some powiats that were developing fast, think about big cities where wages were growing, and such areas were better placed for refugees, so we can expect more refugees. And it is not because of refugees, but because of these previous trends that wages are growing faster. We also controlled for this, looking at the economic literature, how we try to estimate the impact of refugees separately from those underlying trends. And again, we saw robust positive impact of refugees. So now we can talk about causality, that refugees caused Polish wages to grow faster. As it was already mentioned, we see that more Poles are working in better paid jobs. They moved up, their productivity increased. So the economy adjusted. This might sound counterintuitive, but this is something that we see around the world. We heard about Germany. We see a lot of economic research showing such impact of foreigners. Some research is focused on refugees, some research is focused on migrants, but the direction and those mechanisms are well known. So we're really happy to be able to document them also in Poland. Taking together this direct contribution of refugees working, but also their positive impact on Polish workers and how the economy adjusts, we see here the green line represents how economy would behave without refugees. This is counterfactual scenario. We estimated how the world would look like without refugees. And then there is blue line that is higher. So in each year, our GDP is at the higher level with refugees than in a world that where refugees are not in Poland. So you can think about this figure that 2.7% of GDP, this is the amount that would be gone if refugees disappear from in a one day. This is really huge positive impact. Impact is positive, but there are still challenges that remain. Refugees tend to be a little bit better educated than Poles. Around 40% of them have higher education. But they are 3 times less likely than Poles to work as managers, professionals, or technicians. So we can say occupations that are associated with higher education. Part of this is due to language barriers. Less than 20% of refugees fluently speak Polish, and for professional jobs, the language barrier can be a bigger obstacle. We estimated that the Polish fluency in Polish increases the net wage of refugee by about 700 zlotys. So this is his takeaway, but remember that nearly the same amount will be paid in the taxes. That when people earn more, they contribute also more in taxes. So at the moment, it takes around 29 months for a refugee to become fluent in Polish. Here is the first gap that we still see potential for improvement. There's also, in Poland, we have a lot of discussion about regulated professions. That many professions are regulated, you cannot easily get there. Around 10% of Poles work in such professions. For refugees, it is less than 4%. I wouldn't go now here into discussion about which professions should be regulated or should not, but I would focus your attention on the fact that in some professions it's only about citizenship, that it's not about qualification, it's not about quality control of professional services, it's only about citizenship. And this is another barrier that can be addressed. Of course, we see such barriers around the world, and please remember that not all the skills are easily transferable between countries. Ukrainian lawyer that's specialized in Ukrainian law needs time to adjust to Polish law, but also needs business contacts. So it's not always that easy. But for other professionals, for example, for teachers supporting also Ukrainian children, requirement of citizenship is a barrier that is hard to justify. I talked a lot about how those people fare in the labor market, saying that the employment rate is high, that it is a success. But please bear in mind that there are also more vulnerable refugees. When we look at the most entrepreneurial people, people who run their own businesses, were self-employed in Ukraine, 90% of them in Poland is working. They had huge, high human capital, they were entrepreneurial, they take care about themselves in Poland. The same thing is with employed. But people who care about household responsibilities, people who are outside of the labor market in Ukraine, also more than half of them is outside of the labor market in Poland. So here we are talking not only about support that refugees need, but about labor market policies, how to help such people come to labor, integrate into labor market, no matter whether it is Poland or Ukraine. So to sum up, I think that our research have three main takeaways. First of all, that we see positive impact on Polish workers. This is counterintuitive, but it is well documented in the literature, and we see this in the data for Poland. So this is very important. This taken together with high employment rate of refugees means that their impact on Polish economy is really huge and positive. And last but not the least, please remember that there is still room for improvement when we address half of the gap in overqualification, half of the gap in language fluency, half of the gap in employment rate. It could increase Polish GDP by more than 6 billion zlotys. So, and with this 6 billion zlotys comes more than 2 billion zlotys in tax revenue. So this is something that we all could benefit. Yes, please.
Can I ask a question? Can you go back to the slide with the profession? This, of course, no, that one. The one you showed with the blue.
Of course.
Of course, this does not mean that 91% of those who are self-employed are also self-employed here. So these people who were self-employed might work, I don't know, in other, let's say, less independent jobs here. Is that correct?
Exactly. Majority of them works as employees, but also what we see for the last 2 years, that the number of self-employed Ukrainians is growing really fast. I think that over 2 years it grew from less than around 7,000 to 55,000 self-employed refugees. This is data from I think middle of 2024, and the trend was really increasing. When we had some interviews and discussed this with organizations that support refugees that want to establish business, they said that this is gaining pace, because initially such people thought that they are here temporary. So they were looking for temporary job. They were entrepreneurial, so they could take care of themselves. But to start a business, invest in relationship, create business networks, they were at the beginning not ready for such commitment. Of course, I would put aside IT guys, because those are jobs that can be delivered from everywhere, and we don't see them in the samples. This is a little bit different group. But I'm talking about more traditional entrepreneurs. But now we hear and we see in KRS, in ZUS, and other publicly available data that these numbers of self-employed are growing fast. Also, better regulatory changes are also helping. This is easier for them to establish businesses. We can see here the differences in approach, that previously we saw large number of refugees from Belarus who are fleeing repression, not war. And among them, self-employment rates were also growing, but at a little bit slower pace. So without such easy access to business establishment, it was a little bit harder for them. Yes, please.
I have a question regarding the percentage. This is the percentage of the total.
Please the microphone because of the translation.
Good morning. I have a question on the percentage. The percentage of total of what number? Of all number of all refugees, or
Of
91%?
of people who were previously self-employed in Ukraine. When you took 100 self-employed people from Ukraine, 91 of them will be working in Poland.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. From the previous talks, we know that the refugee from Ukraine in Poland has usually the face of female. Can you elaborate a bit more about that and the consequences for the labor market?
This impact was really strong at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, because on the one hand we saw inflow of women, and on the other hand we saw outflow of men who were in Poland as Ukrainian workers. So it was affecting some particular sectors. For example, construction, transport were negatively affected by outflow, while in service sectors, education, we saw larger inflow of people. This is why we were looking particularly at employment rate of Polish women. This is the area that we were afraid that some negative impact can be in these occupations that are usually held by a woman. But this is not what we saw. Of course, this gender balance means a little bit different challenges. Access to childcare is much more important. Access to childcare, to education, and also, as there are quite many teachers from Ukraine, these regulatory barriers can also be important. This is something that struck me, that for some levels of professional, we have, I think, 3 or 4 levels of teachers in Poland. And the upper levels are restricted for Polish citizens. So when we have female teachers from Ukraine, this can be a barrier that is, in my opinion, hard to justify.
Well, thank you for your question about the gender situation. Well, so what I taken from what you said about the GDP 2.7% and actually the percentage rate of female refugees, that's an interesting observation for the Polish economy. What is the gap about actually in female labor? Because apparently they filled up all jobs that are originally meant for female, not men. And that's the increase of the GDP and actually the participation in the GDP. Would you agree on that or not? Thank you.
Partially. Something that we know from literature, but we're not able to confirm in data. When I was talking that there is a strong evidence that inflow of foreigners can boost employment of domestic citizens, one of the discussed channels were services that support women active workers. So, for example, cleaning, childcare, and so on. If there are foreigners that can provide such services, then more domestic citizens is on the labor market. So this is something that we know in the literature and from other countries, but we didn't have such data, such granular data to confirm. But probably this is also happening in Poland. And as far as filling those gaps left by Polish women, I would be a little bit more careful because our economy is changing rapidly. We are aging, employment rates are going up, job composition is shifting, so there's a lot of going on simultaneously. So I wouldn't say that there are static number of jobs that could be held by women, and they were absent, so they were filled. So a lot of adjustment is happening at the moment. You know, the number of Polish citizens insured in ZUS, so we can take this as a proxy of those people that work in the most productive part of the economy as employees or self-employed, peaked in 2019. Since this time number of Poles working is falling due to aging, and refugees were filling part of those gaps.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up on that precisely and to make sure I correctly understood. So when you build the contrafactual pointing out that the surplus of GDP from the refugees is 2.7, we're really talking about the roughly 200,000 refugee registered on ZUS as workforce. So, or you're considering like the whole Ukrainian population, because if 200,000 overqualified women can supply 3% of Poland GDP, it's huge. And if we consider the whole Ukrainian workforce in Poland, which is roughly 1 million people, it means that we have, quickly thinking about 10% of Polish GDP that relies on Ukrainian. So, I mean, I didn't find I was looking through the appendix of your report right now, and I mean, I'm quite a little bit surprised by that. I don't know.
That's a really good question. When we modeled the number of refugees to put in the model, we used employment rate from the survey, the 69%, and multiplied it by working age population of refugees. This is approach similar to approach in national accounts that we use labor force survey data to estimate the all working population, taking into account also shadow economy, jobs that do not require social security, and so on. So, of course, in case of refugees, this share of insured in ZUS is a little bit smaller than for Poles, but we took the same approach for the both groups. And yes, all the foreigners have really huge impact on Polish GDP. That's for sure. We were concentrated only on refugees, so people who have PESEL, UKR, so according to law can be treated as refugees. And as far as I remember, their impact on GDP was slightly larger than their share on GDP, so this is this productivity boost for the whole population, but majority was on this extensive margin, I would say.
Hello, my name is Maria Buslav, Ukrainian Educational Hub in Poland. I have two questions, actually, one by one I will ask. First is about, we all expect that the war finish soon or someday, and some part of Ukrainians will come back. By different analysis, it's about 30% that still want to come back. And how it will influence to the GDP, it will fall down, or it will be stay on the same level, replacing by other people. So did you prognose it somehow? That's my first question.
There are quite many factors influencing this. Of course, when we take ceteris paribus, everything stays the same, and just pull from the labor market 30% of working refugees, then of course it will lower GDP. But hopefully there will be also peace dividend that business investors and so on will be looking better at Poland and will not be a country close to the war. There will be positive impact from the rebuilding of Ukraine. And maybe other people will also come to Poland. So the number of factors affecting the outcome is really huge. But of course, taking everything constant and just pulling out of the labor market people will have a negative impact on GDP. This is true.
Okay, thank you so much. And my second question is, did you translate this report and the survey to Ukrainian language, and was it presented to Ukrainian government? Because now in Ukraine there is a new Ministry of Ukrainian National Unity, which is actually responsible for working with the refugees all over the world. And I think this data could be very important and helpful for lobbying or maybe just forcing the Ukrainian issue on the level of European Commission and so on.
We haven't, this is we are showing it publicly for the first time. For the previous edition we had translated a summary in Ukrainian and shared it with the government. So I think that we will do the same this time.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, I have a question. I just wanted to reconfirm one information you shared. You said 69% employment rate among Ukrainian refugees or among Ukrainians overall. And I think you said that includes also the shadow economy, so all the people legally and illegally employed. Could you confirm that?
Yes, 69% it is for refugees alone. We were not looking at broader population of Ukrainians, but I know that there are people from National Bank of Poland who looked at refugees and for other migrants, and for those employment rates are higher for pre-war migrants. And sorry, what was the second part of the question? Yes, this is standard question. This is the same approach we take for Polish citizens and for all or other people. We just ask whether you have worked for money. I don't remember the time frame, but this is standard question that is used by Eurostat, Polish Statistical Office, and so on.
My question is related: how much of this gross domestic product is transferred from Poland to Ukraine annually?
We haven't looked at this. In the previous report, we saw transfers in the other direction as well. That people who were remotely working in Ukraine and were supporting families here, as far as I can remember, there was some changes in the way that the National Bank of Ukraine publishes data. So I don't think that we had to make some assumptions this time, I remember. But I don't remember particular details. But what we saw during the time that those data were available, that this flow of money from Ukraine was getting smaller as more people settled here. So there was some change and adjustment. And this is something that we expect, that when people arrive with just one backpack, they spend their saving, they transfer their saving to start a life. But once they settle, they start to take care for themselves without such support. And as you mentioned, they can support in other direction. But I don't have at the moment the size of those flows.
Thank you very much. And precisely, maybe my question is not that much for Alexander, much likely for Kevin, right? From UNHCR. It's a little bit more political, actually. And I mean, from a very personal opinion and perspective, I think it's a little bit of shame that this report is published now and not, let's say, 1 month ago, 2 weeks ago. And will UNHCR do like PR campaigns on Polish media outlets? Because clearly your findings didn't match to the views of the majority of Polish voters currently, I believe, based on the recent elections. Yeah, I mean, are you invited by Polish media outlets to present your findings?
Well, funny you ask. We're having a press conference at the Polish press agency at POP this afternoon at 2 or 3. In terms of the timing of issuing the report, I mean, we don't follow political cycles as Deloitte or UNHCR. There was a lot of work to make sure that the methodology was sound and that the data was crunched correctly. But rest assured, we'll be disseminating it quite widely at the very highest levels of government, from Prime Minister Duda to Mr. Nawrocki and Mr. Duda while he's still in the office, also to the SEM, the Senate, different committees in the Parliament. And we've offered to do a briefing on this for them. But you know, the other part of this that we count on you to help us do is to disseminate it through your channels, because a lot of this is surprising. My brother-in-law is a young executive in a small Polish company that produces microchip circuit boards. And he's Polish. My wife is Polish. And he was stunned by this. And you know, he's a business person. He's in the private sector. But it's just not always intuitive, as Alexander was saying. You assume that this influx of foreign workers will drive down wages, but it's actually been the opposite. So in short, we're going to do everything that we possibly can to disseminate it through the media, both Polish but also international outlets, because this is frankly rather stunning, this result. And I think we can all agree at this moment in time, politically, geopolitically, we need a good news story. And this is objectively based on hard, cold data. Leave your emotions aside. This is a good news story. And I said, you know, when I was making my introductory remarks, I'm not a politician, but if I was, I would run on this. I mean, this shows you can, I think, do it all. You can address national security concerns, you can have strong border management, and you can receive people seeking asylum, legitimately fleeing persecution and war, and incorporate them into your economy in a way that's a win-win for everybody. So stay tuned. Hopefully we get the coverage we want from the press conference this afternoon, but also help us to disseminate this. And again, thanks to Alexander for doing all the great work on this in Deloitte.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, participants, for the questions. We're going to move for a panel discussion, very brief, with 3 key panelists. But maybe I'll call Elisa to the floor, please, our moderator. I'm sorry I cannot say the last name. My Polish is not there yet.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honor to host this panel for you. And don't be afraid, we are not going to deeply analyze all of these numbers, giving a freedom for our economic experts from Deloitte. But thank you, Excellency. But we would like to discuss a bit more about the shift of Poland from emergency response over 3 years ago to this today situation with sustainable economic inclusion, and what should be done, what we are now should focus on to have this great value added which come to this country with regards to the group of vulnerable people. So on behalf of UNHCR, my name is Eliza Przeździecka, and let me invite my great experts to this panel. From humanitarian response to economic integration, refugees as agents of growth, Poland's future economy. Kevin Allen, UNHCR representative in Poland. Paweł Strzelecki, our economic expert representing today Warsaw School of Economics. And last but not least, our great author and the chief of the team of economists from Deloitte, Aleksander Łaszek, a Senior Manager from Deloitte. Wow, there are great notes, Professor, here. So, yeah, let's use them and let's discuss that deeply here. All right, as I said, this panel will reflect on the shift from the emergency assistance to sustainable economic inclusion. And we would like to answer the following question: how we can unlock further economic potential and use this value added of the human capital. So, newly released report presented just a couple of minutes ago shows that the past year refugees' employment rate raised from 61 to 69%, significantly increase just for 1 year, with the median net wage raising from just slightly over 3,000 zlotys to 4,000, which actually again narrowing the gap to the median net in the entire economy. So just giving a few more words from Alek, I would like to ask, how do you assess the macroeconomic impact of integration of refugees into Poland labor market so far? And basically, I would like to highlight what are the ways in which ongoing inclusion can contribute to the long-term economic resilience and demographic stability, which actually with regards to the aging population trend is gonna be pretty hot topic for discussion for the next couple of years.
Thank you. First of all, as you already mentioned, our demography is really a challenge. So refugees came at the moment that we really need workers. So this is first point. But the second point is, as our discussion is titled, we see that they are integrating better and better. So in the discussion before, I mentioned this example of entrepreneurs who started with temporary jobs, but now they are deciding to invest in business, start running a business. We see the similar thing with people sending their children to schools. That for some time they were keeping children in online education, but now they are deciding to stay here for longer, waiting for war to end. And the things that they are doing now, on the one hand, are benefiting Polish economy, but on the other hand, now they are preserving their human capital. So at the first moment, it was about surviving, protecting life. And now we are talking more about preserving human capital and using it for also Polish economy.
Yes, so far as I remember the GUS data, Statistics Poland, a great part of the newly created businesses were established by Ukrainians. So they are not just self-employed, they are also business owners, which invested and decided to put and set up their business within the economy. But let's not lose the sight of the people behind the numbers. So these are mothers, professionals, and the young people, individuals rebuilding their lives in the face of unimaginable loss. So their resistance is matched only by solidarity shown by Polish institutions, organizations, employers, as well as NGOs, civil society. Mr. Allen, how does UNHCR view Poland's policy environment in terms of the enabling refugee self-reliance and economic inclusion?
Well, I mean, just at the outset to maybe emphasize what I think I said earlier, it's not at all a foregone conclusion globally in a refugee crisis that a government will allow people to work and allow people to start small businesses. So that as a threshold matter is rather unusual. I will also say, as a caveat to that comment, this is not the case for other refugees in Poland. who are seeking asylum. They have to wait a period of 6 months before they can work. And I would argue this is a great reason that policy should change, or that legislation should be amended, because that's but yet another source of income, GDP generation, a productivity boost that's just waiting to happen for non-Ukrainians. But the other part of the story, and I hadn't personally really fully appreciated this until recently, and I was reminded of it when reading the report. You can't just allow people to work and start businesses in a vacuum, especially when you're talking about mothers who are alone or maybe have an elderly parent and children. You have to have other forms of support. So school for the kids, access to free education, on par with Polish nationals. Access to healthcare, on par with Polish nationals. Receiving the 800+ benefit for your children. All of these kind of social protection aspects of the economy are very powerful enabling factors. And if you take that away, then you suddenly have a Ukrainian mother and her children who's just simply fighting for survival but can't thrive and can't really build resilience. You're just scrapping to make ends meet. So that social protection aspect of it, I think is a really key ingredient of success. And of course, this isn't just in Poland, it's been throughout the entire EU, all 27 member states with the Temporary Protection Directive. So talk about best practice. I mean, it's happening here and you're seeing it. But a few things that I just wrote down a few notes to make sure I don't forget. Things that we could potentially do better. Alexander mentioned perhaps the obvious one. When you look at the education level of Ukrainian refugees, their talent is underutilized. So one of the big challenges for us going forward is to make sure that a qualified nurse or a dentist is not compelled to work in a nail salon, even though that's a perfectly acceptable job, but can actually work as a nurse in a hospital. Instead of driving an Uber, can exercise the profession of accountant, for example. Related to that also is the issue of language. I know the Polish government has done a number of different initiatives to provide access to language training, and a number of our NGO partners, including some in the room, have done that. But it's quite interesting, the graph that Alexander showed, that it's not just speaking some Polish, but the more proficient you get, the higher your productivity and earnings go. So that's another, I think, challenge and something that we can continue to work on. The issue of licensing and certificates. There's been some movement on this in the parliament across the street to flexibilize certain parts of the Polish legislation, but I think more can still be done on that front. As Alexander said, it's understandable in some professions. If you're a Ukrainian lawyer who specializes in Ukrainian tax law, you can't necessarily immediately apply that to the tax code in Poland, but there should be, I think, an avenue to eventually get those certifications and credentials, because it's ultimately going to be in the benefit of not just Ukrainians, but also Poles. The whole training and upskilling aspect maybe relates to my first point in some ways, but even to people who don't have that higher education level, being able to gain new skills. Now, part of that can happen through government-sponsored programs for vocational training, but my personal view, and this is perhaps from my previous time in the private sector, is that I think the private sector probably does it better. So continuing to work with business associations, with companies, to explain why this investment in human capital actually can yield dividends for you and your company. A couple things that we didn't touch on a lot. Childcare, this is in some ways the elephant in the room when you're talking about a population that is in its great majority women working. This is not just an issue for Ukrainian women, of course, it's an issue for Polish women and for others in the Polish society and many societies. But I think as much as we can continue to promote that, on the one hand through policy initiatives, and the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Policy has done a lot, but also through private sector, once again. Now you have some countries where I've been, I'm thinking in Latin America, where corporations have actually issued social bonds to generate revenue to build childcare facilities at a company, for example. But in Poland, the bond market apparently, according to people who are smarter than me, isn't necessarily conducive to that. It's not, the fundamentals aren't right. But what can be done is to show how it's actually just simply good for the bottom line of the business by giving examples from other countries or contexts. So for example, having Corporation A that's working in Sweden say, listen, we have this policy and we've invested in this to provide corporate childcare, and it actually increases the productivity of our workers, and ultimately it increases the bottom line. We make more profit, our shareholders are happy, it's a win-win for everybody. So some of that's more kind of advisory services that could potentially be explored. It's not within our remit really as UNHCR, but I'm thinking of the International Finance Corporation, the World Bank Group, for example, potentially would be positioned to do some of that. On that note, and I'm looking at my friend Olga from the International Finance Corporation, last thing I'll say, another piece of this equation is access to credit. So not just economic inclusion, but financial inclusion. Now, one of the things I often talk about, and a lot of people don't know about it, is that Banco Santander and the IFC actually joined up to do a very interesting initiative in the early days of the crisis to facilitate $100 million or euros, I can't remember, Olga, was it dollars, euros, in loans for Ukrainian refugees. Now, we won't get into how that was structured, but as I recall, I think IFC put in $17 million to offset risk, maybe to reduce interest rates, but it freed up access to credit. Now, this is interesting, but the other part of this, especially when you look at Alexander's analysis of how many entrepreneurs or small individually employed businesses are out there, I would like to see more done personally in the context of microfinance, so access to credit for smaller businesses. I'm not an expert in this. I'm looking at my colleague Eliza, who knows more about it than I do. But I think that maybe is a gap in Poland compared to some places where I've worked. So I think access to microfinance. Last thing I'll say, I just wanted to pick up on a question from our colleague from, I think, the Ukrainian Educational Center NGO. What happens when everybody goes back to Ukraine? Isn't that going to result in a loss to GDP? And again, I'm not an economist and I don't understand the complexity of what Alexander does. But of course, there's lots of different factors. But the one thing that I say oftentimes is we can't lose sight of the fact that we are investing in human capital for the future, and that may be labor mobility. That may be foreign direct investment. That may be cross-border trade and commerce. So how great would it be, and this is what the future I think will hold, when you have Ukrainians who speak Polish and Ukrainian, who know the regulatory environment in Poland and the EU, and then suddenly you have a very interesting synergy where you can have increased cross-border movement of goods, services, people, labor mobility. That's maybe another study we should do in the future, because that is very exciting. And so I wouldn't necessarily see this scenario playing out in a way that is a net loss for either country. I think it actually, if done correctly, and if we continue down this path, will be a net positive for Europe, for Poland, for Ukraine.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you mentioned about microfinance sector, because it's absolutely on the developed and still needs to have more incentives from all sides, from the demand side, as refugees need these instruments to set up businesses, to finance all of these ideas which may come up the mind and create a value added, as well as institutional level, like banks would require these instruments to be available in the market. Yes, so let's focus on a bit of the group which is inactive in the labor market. We have been discussing very much on those which are active, which are taxpayers and which are involved into the economy as workers or entrepreneurs. But there is still 25% of inactive working age population refugees. And this is still very huge potential for the economy. Over the time, they may learn English based on the development of the system of the Polish as a second language, which hopefully may force that. they would also be a lost value added if we leave this 25% untouched. I would now move my question to Paweł Strzelecki. Professor, what's a labor market perspective and this mismatch that exists between refugees population and the needs of the economy, especially with regards to the inactive group of working age population refugees?
Yeah, thank you for invitation for this great event. And I think I start from giving maybe more credibility to the results, because you have used your own survey, and I'm engaged in the survey that is carried out by the National Bank of Poland on the very numerous group or sample of people, and the results are quite similar. I know that our colleagues from the University of Warsaw also have similar findings about a remarkably high activity of the refugees in Poland, and it is from the first year of the war. So definitely this openness to refugees in terms of giving them free access to labor market, etc. In fact, I think it paid out, because they started to be active very soon. However, of course, the glass is also in one half empty and in one half full. So let me now focus on what is this the drawbacks that we can observe. From our studies, we see that the unemployment rate of not only refugees but immigrants, but especially refugees, is close to 20%, while in the economy in general it's lower than 5% according to labor force survey. And so not necessarily the people that are not employed are just inactive. They very frequently want to find a job, but in fact there are some obstacles. And what are the potential obstacles? Of course, the general problem was that are the forced migrants. So they are in Poland not because they wanted to increase their wages, but because simply they were forced to move to Poland. And some of them and many of them were women, very often with children. We have more than 500,000 of Ukrainian children in Poland. So somebody needs to take care of these children. And what we observe also in our surveys is that there is a problem, because many of refugees are searching for a job, but not full time. And in fact, in Poland, we have a habit of the full-time job. In fact, we are on the second or third place in the European Union in terms of the popularity of full-time jobs and unpopularity of part-time jobs, in fact. And this is not only about immigrant women, it is about the women in Poland, that in fact this is a problem also for Polish people, Polish citizens. About the other aspects, you shown, and it is also confirmed by our studies, is that there is a high percentage of tertiary education refugees, and these are mainly women with tertiary education. So tertiary education focus mainly on services, probably not on the industrial sector, not on the STEM or something like that, or this kind of qualifications, and they are less transferable between countries, I suppose. I mean, you have lawyers, as it was already mentioned. You have persons in different. So for sure there is. I don't want to say that it is normal, but unfortunately that is something that we should work out to give these people that came to our country the opportunity to move to the higher skilled jobs. And in fact, it is all the good news. It is already observed. I mean, we have the 3 years of observations in our surveys, and we asked each time the persons about what is your assessment of the job that you are doing in Poland. And in fact, there is a movement from these very low skilled jobs to the jobs that require some skills, to require tertiary education as well, mainly from this no skill at all to some skills are needed. But okay, there is happening. However, I think we can do more to make it faster. One last point that was not mentioned here, probably because we have in Poland the very low unemployment rate, and the discussion about the quality of the searching for the institutions that help in searching for a job. I mean, the employment offices. I think we forgot about that. And in fact, what the immigrants asked in our surveys declared, they are in fact very interested in help in finding a better job. Yes, mm-hmm. And so to have this better job placement, better information about where are the free places for their skills on the Polish labor market. In fact, it stopped. It is now not a problem probably for Polish citizens that are more prepared for searching for a job in Poland. However, for immigrants, I think it's still a problem. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So the access to the information is also pretty critical in this case. So we have just seen how far we have come and what else needs to be done, and which is critical for further integration and the usage of all of this lost value added within this 25% inactive people. So leaving those challenges unaddressed, we can lose more, but there is a huge potential still to activate a new part of the labor force. Alexander, I'd like to raise this question to you from your perspective, and taking account the results what you already have seen in your research. What are the most promising sectors or regions where the targeted upskilling and reskilling and a targeted intervention of refugees could generate the highest returns? Returns for both, returns for this group of vulnerable people, but as well as the domestic economy, Polish economy.
I think that is good to remember and highlight that part of this already have happened due to our policies, that people were able to settle where they wanted, so they migrated to the large cities when the job prospects are better. So this is something that happened, and this is something that sets Poland a little bit apart from many of other European countries, when there were some programs to resettle refugees, to ease housing shortages. But when you move people to the areas where domestic citizens struggle to find a job and are leaving those areas, then you should not be surprised that refugees are struggling there. So this is unfortunately a lesson of some countries. So, but as you mentioned, there is still a place for improvement. So I think that discussing sector by sector, I don't feel that in our research we have enough data to discuss sector by sector. But looking at international evidence, I would even stronger support language courses, because this is universal intervention. And when we are talking about professional jobs, service jobs, better understanding of the client is crucial. So when people want to have move upward, they have not only basic understanding of Polish, but this fluent Polish. And this is something that came up in our different interviews and interactions, that this fluency is really required for professionals. So this is something that I would focus on.
And Professor Strzelecki, what's your opinion about that? Sectoral intervention, more topic-oriented? What do you think?
I think that in order to invest in the skills of your workers, and that your workers can be refugees, you need to be sure that these people are going to stay in your company, and that there will be no problems with the further stay of the people in Poland, of these people in Poland. And in fact, what also came from our surveys is that there is a huge demand for the kind of stabilization of the situation in Poland from the Ukrainian immigrants, not only refugees but immigrants as such. Of course, it's a very, very political issue, because giving more them opportunity to stay in Poland for a very long time. It is both not probably very okay. It can demonstrate that we are not we want to keep them in Poland, and probably not persuade them to return to Ukraine. But on the other hand, I think it is for now and for the years to come, I think this is one of the problem of the Polish migration policy to formulate the paths that can follow in the Polish economy, that can give them the stable situation in Poland. I totally agree with this opinion about the Polish language. In fact, if we analyze the wages of immigrants, also the wage gap between immigrants and Polish citizens with the same skills, the same occupations, etc. For the high skilled, the fluent Polish language, it's really the main driver. And what I can say more is that I think that in the long time horizon we should think about maybe the cooperation with also Ukrainian government about what can be the solution. Not only probably Poland, but also other European countries. What can be the solution that will bring another win-win situations? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is long-term perspective. The intervention is needed as a process, not just a reaction for the crisis. The migration or any demographic aging processes is not like a crisis. This is a phenomenon that we face with, and the processing the actions. So what we do now will shape what comes next. So actually, I would like to raise my last question to Kevin Allen. What are the strategic priorities for UNHCR moving forward to support national system in leveraging refugees' human capital for wealthier state?
I'm not sure. I'll answer part of that, maybe not all of it, and I may say something else, but it's a good question. So, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the policy prescriptions we've discussed, and I think it's pretty clear, how this can all occur in a way that continues to be a win-win for everybody. But I maybe want to delve in a little bit to some of what Piotr was saying in terms of some of the internal challenges in Poland, but then maybe I want to conclude by thinking about Ukraine and making a distinction between migration policy and refugee policy, between planned labor mobility and visa regimes versus forced displacement, and how to make the best of a bad situation. So, I mean, maybe sticking just internally within Poland, and the 25% or whatever the figure is who are not working. And let me take this down even to a more macro level. Some of you have heard about collective shelters in Poland. There were no refugee camps after the large-scale influx, but you did have people staying in gymnasiums and public buildings that had been kind of converted into collective shelters. And when I first arrived here in the summer of 2022, there were around 100,000 Ukrainians in those collective sites. Today, if you fast forward to the present, it's about 27,500. Now, these represent, in broad strokes, the most vulnerable of the refugees. That said, we've been working with some of our partners, and I don't know if we have any colleagues here from the Polish Red Cross or PCPM, who've worked with the Ministry of Interior with EU funds to try to engage in different initiatives to, if I can use the word, activate people in the collective centers, or to enable them, empower them to be more self-sufficient, with some success. But the bottom line is, you're going to have a certain percentage of those people who just simply can't work. And I have met on multiple occasions women in their 80s who tell me, I can work. And as much as that moves my heart, and I find that incredibly compelling and an illustration of the strength of the human spirit and the Ukrainian spirit in particular, I know that it's very unlikely she's going to be able to work. And she may be alone, her family may be back in Ukraine, or she may actually not have family. We have other people who are severely traumatized, psychosocial trauma, even physical disabilities. So you're going to have a certain percentage of people who need social welfare from the state. That's just a given. That's not to say that we shouldn't continue to work to try to increase the self-reliance, to activate, if I can use that term, others to contribute and to be part of the economy. But this is also a reflection of the fact that this is not a normal migrant population. These are people who were forced to flee in the middle of the night, oftentimes, and they did not make the decision to come here for economic reasons. So we need to keep that in mind. Another thing that I think we didn't talk about here, but it's always good to keep in our minds, is labor exploitation. You do have a number of individuals working in the gray market. You have issues of people being underpaid, not paid on time, not paid at all. So that's something else that we need to keep an eye on. It's not all beautiful, this story. It largely is. It's a very positive story. But there are people who are vulnerable, who are going to need special support. There are people who are in the market who maybe are being exploited, or who are at risk of being exploited. So we need to always think about that. In terms of job placement, I agree with Piotr. There's probably more that we can continue to do on that front. We've tried our best, even though it's not necessarily our comparative advantage to do that. Working with regional labor offices throughout the country, we've, I don't know, organized probably 70 or 80 job fairs with hundreds and hundreds of companies over the last several years to try to place refugees, to link them up with the corporate sector, with private sector employers. And we've also worked with business associations. And again, I often am most optimistic about the private sector kind of working its magic to try to figure out how to absorb human capital into the market. But I agree that's something that we can continue to work on. I will say we have a very good relationship with the Ministry of Family, Labor, Social Policy at the central level, and also the regional labor offices to try to keep doing that. But the final thing that I want to maybe talk about is this distinction between economic migrants and refugees. And you mentioned, Piotr, very rightly, this notion of predictability in terms of length of stay. It's hard for individuals to invest in their future or their economic reality in Poland if they don't know how long they're going to be here. And then on the flip side, it's hard for employers to plan. And I'll come back to the case of my brother-in-law who runs this small company. There are a number of Ukrainians there, but he's told me, well, we don't know how long they're going to be here. And he'll ask me, how long is this temporary protection going to be extended? You have the same thing with banks who maybe don't want to loan people money because they're not sure how long they're going to be here to pay it back. So these are all, I don't know, for lack of a better term, externalities that have to be managed. But they're never going to go away because this is not an economic migrant population. Now, related to that, and I want to really emphasize this point, and I say this in part with my friends from Ukraine, most Ukrainians want to go back home. The reason they're not going back home is because Russia continues its onslaught in the country, continues to bomb civilian infrastructure, continues to bomb electrical power grids, continues to target civilians. There is a war that continues. That's why most people are not going home. Now, there may be some people who decide they prefer to stay here, or maybe they decide to go back and forth, but most people would like to go back home. So our mandate as UNHCR, and this is where we are experts, is to seek solutions for refugees. And one of those solutions is, and the preferred solution, is to return home, because most refugees want to go home. And if I could maybe anticipate what my friends from Ukraine would say, they would also tell us they need them to go back home, because they have their own demographic crisis, and it's much more acute, in part because of the tragedy of war and the loss of life. So when we think about this as UNHCR, we think of investment in human capital for the future in a way that is fluid and that is allowing cross-border mobility. And hopefully people able to go back home and contribute to the reconstruction of Ukraine with new skills, with new knowledge, having preserved some assets and having resilience. And you know, there may be some people in company X, Y, or Z, or even potentially a government ministry who say behind closed doors, well, we'd actually like to have these Ukrainians stay. But the difference, and it's a very key difference, and it's a critical distinction, is they did not come here as part of a regulated migration mobility scheme. They're not labor migrants, they're refugees. They had to flee Russia's full-scale invasion. So once that stops, and let's hope that it does stop, our hope is that people can go back home. But again, for Poland and my friends from Poland and my brother-in-law who wants to continue hiring Ukrainians, maybe there'll be cross-border labor mobility visas and schemes that allow that to happen. I have no doubt that there will be foreign direct investment, that there will be opportunities for Polish companies to invest in the reconstruction of Ukraine. I have no doubt that there'll be ongoing trade and commerce, which will only increase with time. And if one day Ukraine becomes part of the EU, it's going to explode. And we've seen how it exploded in Poland from 2004 to present. I mean, talk about an economic miracle or success story. It's Poland. So, you know, I think it's also important when we look at this data that we frame it in that context. We're not talking about labor migrants. We're talking about people forced to flee. But by making smart policy choices, Poland and the European Union have shown how you can take a bad situation and you can make the best of it in a way that's good for the Ukrainian people, but it's also good for the Polish people and the Europeans.
Thank you very, very much. Poland's response of arrival of over 1 million people for the last 40 months since the war started was exceptional in Europe, not just by its speed and reaction, but also by vision. What the effects we see actually, and in this comprehensive report, and this is a great pleasure for us Poles to see how the country may be established on the basis of this new coming human capital, which again needs to be invested more, not just having the group of refugees as those which receive the aid, but also the contributors to the entire economy. So thank you very, very much for your comments, and thank you, Deloitte team, for a very interesting, and we hope this report will live for the next year with these numbers, which we published now with a new edition of the analysis of the impact of Ukrainian refugees to Polish economy. Thank you very much, and let me thanks to my panelists with a great applause. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is time to talk again and to discuss that. And let me invite you for the small snacks and networking session over there. On this side. Thank you.
I feel like we've met. Have we met each other before, or we saw each other?
There was a meeting.
Like a CMR meeting or something, or no?